are you like kind of a person who says AI is bothering me in the thought process, I don't want it to be in my code editor, or versus, hey, let it jump in, it's helping me to think like a buddy who is coding along with me? So which team are you on that?
That was maybe my first experience in terms of going from research to product. We failed miserably. I lost a year of my life.
Of course, how can we forget what's happening in the world of WordPress? A lot of drama is going on there. I don't know where it's going to fall, but it's interesting to watch it around.
Lambda came out. It's like, wait, you don't have to talk about the server. You don't have to talk about the cloud. It's just my code, and it just runs, and it scales, and it's secure, and I don't have to own anything, just my code. Like, this was the thing we were looking for in terms of describing our technology.
How is it like moving from having your own company to moving into Postman Giant and running your own show there as well?
We have 35 million developers on Postman. Very few actually know about the product.
Oh, by the way, can I ask you one more question? All right. Hey there everyone, my name is Hitesh and you're watching my YouTube channel, and in this channel we talk a lot about the tech. I teach you a lot of tech, especially regarding the Next.js and how to build web APIs and so much more that we talk on this channel. And sometimes we bring some guests on this channel so that you can get a really an insight view from what's happening in the industry, and somebody from who has done all these things and done and dusted, and we can share some experience, share some thoughts around that, some friends that I love to bring on this channel. And today I am also a big fan of the guy who is coming into this talk session. And before I get started, I feel really blessed, and I tweeted about this as well, that sometimes it's an honor to have a guest which has done and dusted so many of the things that you really think, oh man, this is the best job that I have on the YouTube, that I can bring in so many amazing guests, and Rodric is one of them. So hey Rodric, how are you? Thank you so much for spending time and joining in here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be speaking with you as well. You're as big as royalty as I can get to, and it's been very exciting. Looking forward to this one.
Oh man, the first time I heard about, not about you, I'll be honest, not about you, but about your company, when the acquisition happened from the DigitalOcean, if I'm not wrong. That is the first time I heard about your company. I was not aware about you at that point of time, but I searched like every single page of your company, what you do and what you're bringing to the DigitalOcean, because I have been using their services for a while. But man, again, this talk has nothing to do with the DigitalOcean, but again, this is how I came to know about you. And after that, when you agreed that, hey, we will be on the talk show and all of that, I read from line to line on your website. And what a journey, man. You have nailed it down. You have been a seasoned entrepreneur, selling out your company to DigitalOcean. Not only just selling, you have upgraded their whole infrastructure, because I have been using their infrastructure before, and once your serverless computing went into that, oh man, they have changed the game. So very useful contribution there. And these days you are running the show at Postman. So how is it like moving from having your own company to moving into Postman Giant and running your own show there as well? So how is it different there?
Yeah, so at Postman, I don't run the whole show. I run a smaller team called Flows, which is a visual programming language for building applications with APIs. One of the things after leaving DigitalOcean was, and I had told this to Abhinav, who's the CEO and one of the co-founders of Postman, I wasn't looking for a job. I was more looking for a mission. And I remember when I walked into Postman's office, and it felt like a company that was still building. You can just feel that energy. And like I remember in the back of my head, it was like, yeah, let's go. And so I think that transition, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're building a company, it's all about building. Like it's all about figuring out what is the right thing to build, talking to a lot of customers, making sure you've got product market fit. It's a lot of highs, a lot of lows, but like that energy was like very, very familiar. I was like, yeah, I think this is it. And so it was very easy to make that transition. And within Postman, I think the product, the Flows team that I run is essentially a startup within a larger startup. Postman itself has been around for 10 years, but this product has only been around for a couple of years, and it's been growing out of essentially an organic part of Postman called Labs. So it's very exciting, very familiar, and the space itself was familiar to me. I had worked in data flow languages before. I had worked in serverless computing before. I had I love working in developer tools and putting out tools that help developers interact with technology in very different ways. So it felt like it had all the organic pieces. I think the other part is, compared to starting your own company where you're going out and you're pitching investors, you're pitching customers, here you could be completely focused on the customer. I didn't have to pitch investors. Abhinav was there and had to pitch him. But beyond that, it was like, we have what we need to essentially execute. So it's easier in some ways, in a lot of ways, very familiar. But the transition itself was just what I was looking for where I was essentially in my career.
The job that no developers really like, you don't have to do it now anymore, because I understand that part. Submitting the MIS report and to the investors, what happened with the funds, how is it going on, and all of that. You don't have to worry about that. That's a blessing. We'll start one by one with you. We'll come back onto the Postman flow. I'll start directly with the serverless. You have been into the serverless for as long as I know serverless, and you started your research in that. Not only just research, you have pioneered a couple of tools into it. You have pioneered a couple of distributing technologies into the serverless. Even I don't like the word serverless much. I prefer to call it as servers, which I don't care about. So I think a guy like you I would love to ask this question, that where is serverless now compared to where you started? And if serverless talk is here, how can we miss some of the giants which are there and are talk of the town in the Twitter, like Vercel, the serverless front end, as they call themselves. Not only that, the Lambdas are also there. But when you started, it was not like that. It was such a painful thing to have the audacity to call anything as serverless. But you did it, and you did it nicely in your company. So what do you think right now, if somebody wants to build a serverless platform, what are the challenges? And how easy it is or tough it is, and where this is all going on?
Yeah, so interesting with Vercel, because they're going through a lot of controversy as well, even though they have really excellent technology. I think with serverless right now, and maybe for you and me and others in your audience, it's been interesting times in technology, because we've gone through some very interesting phases. Like, just go back a few years ago and it was Kubernetes. And then after Kubernetes, it was serverless. And now it's AI. So it's been very interesting how you just sort of forget older technologies in the sense that they become boring and they become more or less mainstream. They just fade into the background, and it's on to the new thing. This is the thing I love most about our job. Like, our technology is always changing. There's always new and exciting things. It's like, oh man, this is the greatest thing. How did we do without this before? And you're right. I started in serverless, I think right when Amazon Lambda was announced, which is 8-9 years ago now, maybe coming up on a decade. It might have been right around this time, because it was AWS reInvent, which was in November that year that they announced Lambda. And I had been working on something very different. GPUs, before they were exciting, graphics processors that are all the rage now with AI, FPGAs, reconfigurable hardware. They were essentially designing a language and a compiler and a runtime to make it easier for people to tap into the immense compute power that they had, but they're very hard to program. And so that was a project called Liquid Metal at IBM Research, where I was. And then there we saw Lambda came out. It's like, wait, you don't have to talk about the server. You don't have to talk about the cloud. It's just my code, and it just runs, and it scales, and it's secure, and I don't have to own anything, just my code. Like, this was the thing we were looking for in terms of describing our technology. We just hadn't come up with the right language and right framing around it. So we essentially just dropped a lot of what we were doing, and started building what grew into IBM Cloud Functions, an open source project called Apache OpenWhisk, and really set the trajectory for the next few years of my own career. But I think the main insight for me around serverless was very much this notion of freeing me as a developer from having to worry about things I really didn't want to worry about or really care about. I just wanted to build something, and building for the cloud. And that's where we build today. Everything essentially runs in the cloud. It's hard, because you're building this massive supercomputer that you don't own. You can't necessarily SSH into it and really get into the guts of it sometimes. You don't have full control over it. It's distributed systems. There's a lot of things to consider. So simplifying that abstraction for the programmer that says, it's really just your code, was very empowering. I think for me, with some programming language and compiler background, it sort of just clicked. and off we went. And serverless went through, as you were pointing out, a lot of hype, and essentially, went through the trough of disillusionment. But I think now it's relatively mature technology. I saw an article recently that Amazon Lambda served like 1 trillion Lambdas around Prime Day. The scale, I remember when it first started, was 2 billion Lambdas a month. And a Lambda is essentially a function, your code that you upload to the cloud, and it just scales. More function calls, more resources. You don't have to worry about it. And its growth was exponential, probably still is exponential. So it's very empowering, particularly when you want to prototype, when you're just starting out. It was very attractive, essentially, to think about, can I just write my code and ship it? And when you're starting out as an entrepreneur or a new startup, you're very cost conscious. And serverless offers you something essentially where you're paying only for the resources that you need. Very good when you're not scaling yet and you haven't hit massive scale. When you do, then costs invert and lots of interesting considerations to think through. But it takes time to get there when you're building a company. So from the point of view of just building, focusing on the technology, focusing on the core value proposition, I think serverless still commands a lot of power today. And we're seeing other companies sort of catch up in some ways. Cloudflare just announced support for essentially serverless containers. Like, that's great. And serverless doesn't need to necessarily mean function or container. It's really this idea that I just package an artifact and ship it to you. And I defer the burden to the cloud provider to scale it, to secure it, to give me elasticity. And I think that's not going away. It's like so powerful as developers. But now all the rage is AI. It's like, you do something with serverless, probably people don't care as much. But maybe you say serverless AI and it's all the rage.
Yeah. And on top of that, I would agree to somewhat point. I agree. Like DHH, the founder of Ruby on Rails, he loves to mock serverless all the time. And he does it on his scale because he's at a point where everything is such a massive and giant. But what I think from my perspective, because I've been teaching programming for almost a decade now, and I think now it's much more easier from my side to teach any student and just say, hey, this is going in the production. That's it. You don't have to worry about anything. And sometimes even from my students, our students have built the products which are now funded by the VCs. So imagine they didn't know about anything on the server. They just wanted to test their ideas. And although there is a controversy that there is a 500% markup or something. But what I see from my perspective is somebody was able to deploy that and test his idea and is now being funded by VC. That's a superpower I couldn't imagine without the serverless. I agree on that it can be expensive sometime. But as a beginner, the ability to push your code out of your local host, it's dream come true. So I think on that part, I would give a lot of benefits to the serverless technologies and all of that. But yeah, good achievement is going on there. So coming on that, another thing which I'm pretty excited to talk, since you mentioned that as well, liquid metal. I would like to bring your nostalgia back a little on that. Not a lot of people have worked on the compilers and liquid metal. So what was the liquid project, liquid metal? So coming on from your side.
Cool. Yeah. So I briefly alluded to it. I didn't know you were going to ask about it. So liquid metal came about from the idea that computing should be fluid. There's more than just a CPU that you can compute on. We know today GPUs are very efficient at massive parallel programming. Was used for crypto mining for a while, and now it's being deployed for essentially AI training and inference and all of that. So liquid metal was an idea that can you write code essentially once and then have a compiler and a runtime system that deploys it to the artifact or the compute resource that makes the most sense. So if you wrote some code that really needed to that needs to perform really well with very low power, you would deploy it to what's called an FPGA, or a field programmable gate array. This is essentially reconfigurable hardware. Imagine a circuit canvas, and then you can just configure the circuit as you need it. That gives you a lot of compute efficiency. It's very low power. Or maybe you have something that's massively parallel and needs a lot of compute power. You throw it onto the GPU. So what we built was essentially a language that's a superset of Java. It had a functional programming core. This is also earlier when Scala wasn't completely had taken off. Functional programming was maybe in terms of access to everybody was maybe a bit more limited. Now everybody does functional programming. It's embedded with every modern day language. So we built essentially this functional programming core that made it easier for the compiler to recover parallelism and be able to synthesize essentially hardware from a high level language. When you program hardware, it's usually with languages like Verilog, essentially at the level of gates and wires. And so to make it more accessible, it was raise the level of abstraction to the level of a real programming language. And we built some cool demos, like where you could be running code on your JVM, on your Java virtual machine, and then you click a button and you can see it migrate to the GPU or migrate to the FPGA. And it would still compute. Like your program just gets faster or slower depending on where it's running. So Liquid Metal was this idea that computation is fluid. And it was a very exciting project. Learned a lot of things from that because when we were doing it out of IBM Research, very exciting in terms of the technology we were building. We filed a lot of patents. We published a lot of papers, some of the best papers I think that I've published. Very proud of my collaborations in that space as well. Then, at some point, IBM was like, this is really cool. We should productize it. And that was maybe my first experience in terms of going from research to product. We failed miserably. I lost a year of my life. Painful learning, painful lessons, which I was determined not to repeat. And I think applied that successfully in terms of my own company later on. But that's what Liquid Metal was about. And I think,
but that's a rare experience that you go from research to the product, even if it's a failed product, but only a handful of people actually see that experience in their whole journey of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, learning from failure is very important because they're very painful. I think, they scar you for a long time and you become better and you grow better out of it. I think the main thing that sort of learned from that was you got to talk to customers. And I think this is a message out there to every entrepreneur and everybody thinking about building something. You might have an idea in your head. It's like, oh man, wouldn't it be great to build this? At the end of the day, if you can't sell it, you can't convince a customer to part ways with money for the thing that you're building. It's just a hobby. It's a toy. No matter how excited you are about it. And talking to customers became my number one obsession. And it's one of the things I love doing most. Like some conversations are painful. It's like, oh man, I have nothing to sell you, nothing to make your job easier, nothing to make your life easier. It's very painful being in those conversations. But when it clicks, that feeling is just awesome.
Yeah, that I agree. When you are actually building your company for the very first time, you do these mistakes. You think sales as kind of a lower tier job. Programming is a much higher. I should be spending my time. But then you realize that is what the important part is. That is where you'll decide what you're going to be building up. I did those mistakes as well in my earlier startups, but I have learned them hard way as well. But again, there's no easier way to learn all these things.
Right. Yeah. I think I tell this to my team even today, the engineering team and everybody else involved in building Postman Flows is you're always selling. Like job number one is you're selling. If you're out there, doesn't matter where it is. I've had conversations about serverless at holiday parties. You're always looking for those conversations where is what I'm building going to resonate with potential users, potential customers. And job number one is you're always selling.
Yeah, sometimes even entrepreneurs and especially engineers, and especially where I live in the Indian ecosystem, selling is not liked by anyone. They don't want to do sale, but eventually you realize in the life that even Tim Cook is what he's doing in that major event is selling. So it should be looked up as a top tier job, not as something as a down job. But again, coming back on to another question, bringing up from a little of your nostalgia again, open source, I really want to discuss about what was this Streamit project that you worked, I guess, during your MIT days, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah.
You were involved in the open source in your graduation time as well. So what do you think the current situation of open source? How do you look at, is it good from your days? Is it bad? And what do you advise for a new entrepreneur or an engineer that how open source can help you to land that job that you're looking up for or the product that you're building up for? Or how do you see open source is evolving, or is it not?
Yeah, I love open source. I've been working in open source ever since I was a student at NYU. And then through my grad school, I worked on a project with University of Illinois and HP Labs, something called Trimaran. And this was a compiler for Intel had this chip called Itanium, sorry. And essentially, it was a different way of building a chip from superscalar, which left the hardware to do all the scheduling, to shift the burden to the compiler. And you gave it some code, it parallelized it for you, did some speculation, ran more efficiently. What I really liked and found rewarding about open source, which continues today, is how rewarding it is sometimes when you're building something, you put it out there, other people use it, and they find value out of it. Like out of Trimaran, the Trimaran work that we did, there were dozens of papers published at some of the best conferences in computer science, ISCA, Micro, PLDI, others, where people essentially said, yeah, we use a Trimaran system to do this. It was really cool. It's rewarding. And then Streamit came out of MIT. This was Professor Samant Amarasinghe's project. MIT was building a chip, which was called the raw chip, essentially multi-core before multi-core became all the rage. Essentially the idea that you have multiple processors on the same chip. And it was driven by, hey, clock scaling, frequency scaling was going to hit a wall. And you're going to have to go with slower clocks, but more raw compute power on a chip. And so when you do that, parallel programming is hard. How do you solve that problem? Because otherwise you'll just have a bunch of idle cores on your chip. So the idea was design a language that's easy to compile to parallel systems. And that's where Streamit came about. And in some ways, it's a very long arc to what I'm doing now. It's a data flow language, actor-oriented. There's a model of computing called actor-oriented programming, also similar to Khan process networks, with the idea that you have a logic block that does some compute, some function. It receives some input, produces some output, but its state, essentially the memory that it's using to compute, is completely confined and isolated. And that breaks essentially one of the hardest challenges in distributed programming, memory. Like if I have to communicate with lots of neighbors, everything becomes slow. But if you can localize the state, now I can have lots of little agents essentially running around, executing in parallel. And so Streamit was born out of an idea of making it easier to compile for parallel architectures, and based on old ideas in computing called data flow architectures. And then from there went on to do Liquid Metal, which had hints of Streamit in it, essentially this functional programming core that we embedded within Java. We did some of this again in OpenWhisk, Apache OpenWhisk, which was the open source project underlying IBM Cloud Functions, ended up being used for other companies. DigitalOcean runs a version of OpenWhisk today for Cloud Functions. This notion that at some point you have the intrinsic atomic building block, this is the function, and then it's connecting them together. That's where you get the value. And it sort of came full circle for me with Postman Flows. Postman Flows is a data flow language. It's visual. You just program on a canvas. But every node is an API. And in serverless, one of the things that really clicked for me was every function that I deploy to the cloud becomes an API. So APIs and functions became duals of each other, at least in my own thinking and how I think about the technology. So now it's just about composition, and beautiful models of composition were invented in data flow languages. Some of that pioneered at IBM, at MIT. And now we're just putting it all together. It's like revisiting old ideas in new context has been really interesting. But yeah, open source, I think, is incredible. It's a force multiplier for everybody out there, for the world. Where you get into trouble is you build something, somebody is more efficient at monetizing it. It's like, some of that money should be coming back to me. Like, I should be capturing some of that value. And so you see companies going on relicensing, doing some nice, some nasty things with licenses. They create bad will in the community. At the end of the day, it's like somebody just found a better way to monetize it than you did.
And you really need to know your license game if you are going into the open source, which no programmer does in the initial days.
Right.
After the entrepreneurship journey, you realize, oh, how powerful the licenses are. Right. Just a text file just placed there, and how powerful it can be. Few words, just Apache license, MIT license, and oh man, this can change the whole game out there. I'll definitely try to put up a separate video on the channel about explaining gist of all these licenses. These days, a lot of people are trying to use these licenses. Like there are some databases which doesn't allow Amazon to host them as a service. So that's also a lot of debate. A couple of companies, they were open source, they went closed source, they went back into the open source. That also happened. And of course, how can we forget what's happening in the world of WordPress? A lot of drama is going on there. I don't know where it's going to fall, but it's interesting to watch it around.
Right.
Bringing up, since you talked about that, how the same project, the serverless, and moving into the Postman flows. I checked the Postman flows before a long time ago, like a couple of months ago. I did a video on that as well. Now, what I think is this will foundationally change that how you build your even backend or APIs, because Flow now gives you a power to just visualize what's going to happen or how is it going to happen before even writing the code. So do you think it's going to be a fundamental change in how people are building their backend, or is it going to be an afterthought? What do you recommend, that since you're building the whole product, what do you recommend how to use it?
Yeah, I think this is the immense potential behind Flows that has me really excited. What we see today with Flows is that if I'm trying to explain my APIs to you, I could be a big company, PayPal, for example. I have all these payment flows, workflows, and I want you to use my APIs because the more APIs you use, it's a strategic asset to me in my business. So it's really it's in my best interest, essentially, to make it easier for you to consume APIs. So while the Postman has the Postman API network where everybody publishes their APIs, they're publishing the primitives. It's like, here's one API, it does one thing. But what we find is that applications are compositions of lots of APIs. And often they're not APIs. Yeah. And so demonstrating to a consumer how to use my APIs has been very powerful to do with Postman Flows. And you see it time and time again. Like some of my favorite conversations with customers when they start saying and explaining it to me, how they were using it to explain something to somebody else. And it just clicks, particularly when you're an engineer and you're trying to explain to the C-suite, your executives, essentially, how this backend API, which is boring to them, and you're very excited about it. Here's how it changes our business. They can see it. And that visceral reaction time and time again, I think has been a great product market fit for Flows. But that's not where we end. The next journey for Postman Flows is really getting into automations and integrations. This idea that now I can use Flows to build new APIs. And I wrote a recent article that I published on LinkedIn about building a full stack application. It was really an existential question for me. Like, we had built a number of capabilities within the product to make them modular, make it easier to share, whether it's within the team or across Postman, subsets of a flow. It's like, can I build a full stack application? And so I had this thought, and it was really driven by me trying to explain my job to my kids. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I was like, if I can get them to understand it, that's great. Because I think they're the future engineers and technologists who are growing up with AI, who are going to be growing up with things like Postman Flows, visual programming languages. And if they can understand it now, that's like massive superpower for them as they grow older. So I built this application, which was essentially a integration of AI into your terminal. It was driven by a personal pain point. I was trying to parse a comma-separated file to find a particular field in a column. I wanted to normalize in a particular way. And I just couldn't remember the awk command I needed to use. I was like, is it $sign? Is it not $sign? Like, wait, ChatGPT could solve this for me. Sure enough, it did. I was like, but why did I have to go to ChatGPT to do that? So I built an application, which essentially is a command line terminal called FL for Flows. But you type FL and then a string of whatever you want to do after that. Like, hey, show me who's using this particular port on my machine. It's driven by OpenAI under the covers. It's using a feature in Postman Flows called Create with AI that makes it easier for me to essentially consume APIs for AI, generative AI in this context. But I just provide my prompt. Don't worry about anything else. And then I was like, okay, how would you turn this into a business? Well, I need subscriptions. So I integrated Stripe. Well, I need identity providers. So I integrated GitHub. So when you use FL, you can log in with your GitHub ID. It knows who you are. It gives you a free allowance before you even log in to use the product. But it's a full application. If I didn't have a meaningful job I was very excited about, maybe this would be the thing I try to actually turn into a real product. But in doing that, I built 5 or 6 APIs out of core primitives, all of which exist on the Postman API network, made it easier for me to get started. I wrote no code for the backend. It's all Postman. It's all serverless because Postman Flows just runs in the cloud. It was very empowering, and my kids got it. I was like, so they're like, can we build with this? It's like, yeah. And so I set them up with Postman Flows accounts, and they started building with it. And just seeing that interaction on a canvas, very visual, very Brett Victor-like. And it was very empowering. So I think that's what really excites me about Postman. We have 35 million developers on Postman. Very few actually know about the product and that it exists. Like, we're starting to come out of the shadows, if you will.
I complained about it.
Yeah.
Hey, it needs more marketing. But
right.
I really loved, your thought process. I think every developer who is watching this, just rewind this video 5 minutes or 10 minutes and watch the thought process, that how you actually find out a problem, and not just find out a problem. You don't write a hobby code. You try to have a thought process that how can I turn this hobby code into a sellable product? And that's where you actually add a real value. Now your thought process completely changed. It's not just a product for building sake of the building, but it's for the sake of, is somebody going to pay for this one?
Right.
So that's where you start to add a real value into it. So great thought process, man. Thank you so much for sharing it so rawly here. It's so raw format here. So thanks for this.
Tying off to open source, the FL front end is open source. I actually work with an intern of ours, Lucas, who built a lot of the front end, also showed off the collaboration aspect. Building a company is a solitary exercise. So you want to bring people in early and make them your partners so that you feel pain together. There's lots of highs, lots of lows. But yeah, it's open source. And I think, I'm a big believer in that. And I think it'll continue to be very important in AI too. Like, you see that with Meta open sourcing their models. I think they even open source weights recently versus closed source models. Sometimes you open source as a competitive edge. There's this other solution, which is closed source, OpenAI. We'll get people by being open source. A lot of people naturally gravitate to that versus just locked in.
If trust is the factor, open source is going to win you.
Yeah.
So, okay, a couple of more things interesting on the same phase. Since we are going into the AI phase, Postman is super aggressive on the AI. I can see it almost everywhere, and it does a lot of job for me. It makes my life easier. Now, I barely write any tests, to be honest. I does it through the Postman. It does my job, so I don't do it. A little lazy on that side. But I can see also it being integrated into not just test, but writing the docs as well. And a lot of things are happening with the AI. It's making me faster to do the things and all that. So coming on to that part, are you kind of a person who says AI is bothering me in the thought process? I don't want it to be in my code editor, or versus, hey, let it jump in. It's helping me to think like a buddy who is coding along with me. So which team are you on that?
I'm on team integrate AI deeply into your workflows. I use it personally. I've introduced it to my kids. And I think if you're out there listening to this chat, AI is not taking your job. I will take that bet any day of the week. It's a better tool. And in fact, as it gets more efficient, more demand for AI, I think will exist. I use it when I'm brainstorming. I use it when I'm preparing talks. I use it when I'm trying to refine a narrative. Others use it as, research or doing some forms of research. Because it is in some ways a creative engine, right? It's predictive. It's mined data from all over the world, everything that we've published, and that it's managed to scrape. So it isn't, some aspect of it is creative, but it's not replacing a software engineer who's thinking about many facets of a problem in very different ways. But as a tool that's going to help you, absolutely. And, Postman, you mentioned some of the things that we've built into Postbot, which is our AI agent. Test generation, documentation. We've also we have a beta feature for flows that'll help you scaffold an entire flow. We've got all the world's APIs on Postman. So given the job that you're trying to do, we can find the right APIs for you. We can configure them for you. We can connect them to other APIs that are likely used in this scenario to help you solve a problem. Why wouldn't you want that? It just gets you to the value faster and faster.
Get it to me. I don't want to do that job. If I can just narrate a small description, hey, and it's much easier. People don't understand this part as much as, let me also walk you through with the tutorial side of the things when you make. See, APIs are available. The documentation is available. What the missing picture is the flow. People don't just want to know that if I hit the API, I get the response. No. People want to know, how can I have a value, a cryptographic value, which is unique. If I make a web request with the payments, with all the information, if it doesn't go through, what happens when? If it goes through, what happens when? So this is the whole flow that makes a tutorial. And if Postman actually allows you to do that within the Postman, that is your tutorial box in itself that walks you through, okay, this is how the data is going to flow. Because just a one web request and getting that data, it's everywhere. It's not a new science. It's not a new thing that we are building up. But why the tutorials are popular is just because of that flow. You want to know how the authentication system works, how a user sends an email, verify an email, or forget an email. So that whole box, I want to really know. And if you can see that right within the flow as well within the Postman, I think that will make you a tiny bit better developer, and you'll be able to do things faster. That, okay, now I know that what I have to build, I can do it faster. So what do you say on that? Am I going in the correct direction?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And I think more so than that, it's that the power you can get out of this is real. So I spoke recently, actually not that recently, a few months back now, with a non-technical founder who had an idea for essentially automating customer support. He was like, I was able to do this with Flows. I didn't need to hire an engineer. And now I'm able to take this as a demonstration, go pitch investors and raise my seed round based on that. So it's very empowering. And I think we're only touching the tip of the iceberg, if you will, at this point in terms of what we think we're capable of. The models are getting better. The data that we're training them on is getting better, that we can fine tune them on is getting better. And like exactly what you were just saying is immensely powerful. So I think you have to just look at AI as something that is just part of our technology toolkit, and it's going to make us better. And now it's about, how do you wield this immense power to get your job done faster, to realize value faster. But I think, if you show it to, I like to use my kids a lot of motivation for these, because they're growing up with this technology. Like for us, it's new. For them, it's bread and butter. Like it's integrated with WhatsApp. It's integrated with eBay. My son lists cards on eBay he collects baseball cards. He has AI generate the descriptions for him. So these things just become second nature. So you need to understand some aspect of how does this work so that you can wield it effectively. Otherwise, it can mislead you. It can generate things that look compelling but are wrong. That's embarrassing to you. So you have to have knowledge. If you're building something with AI, you have to put in the guardrails. If you're consuming something via AI, you need to make sure you understand its limitations and where it's going to be a boost and where it could be a detriment. But absolutely a believer, and I think it's been transformative and transcends essentially a lot of technical expertise in our space.
Another perspective that anybody wants to take from this talk is AI is just like going at a faster speed onto Stack Overflow. Not every answer is your answer, and same goes for the Stack Overflow. He has also read all those Stack Overflow questions. It's not going to be that mean, which people are on Stack Overflow. It's going to be much nicer to you. But again, it's going to throw you 10 different options, and you need to have a knowledge of which one to pick. Surely you can pick faster with the tabs, but you need to ultimately know what you're picking up, why you're picking up, and how is it going on. Again, I'm also a big believer of chat GPTs and all these models that come around. I install them on my system and have fun with them. What I have noticed is even my delivery of the videos has become much better because they allow me to think and consult with a person so that I can have a better thoughts and arrange my videos much nicer. And people enjoy that more. So I think I love the AI part of it. I inject it in every single part of it. We now generate our own custom subtitles with that. AI helps us in doing a lot of that. I've trained them on my own data. We even generate some of the description, which helps the whole world to get around much faster. Previously, for like 5 years, I didn't wrote a single description on my channel. My channel could have grown much higher if I would have been writing description, but now I'm doing it. So yeah, I love the AI part of it. Okay, a couple of questions. The fun ones now begins. Just won't be taking too much of the time. Few one-liners, two-liners from you. Anybody who is just getting into the college to learn the computer science, one tip from your side, hey, keep that in mind.
Learn to learn programming languages. It's not about one language. Learn to learn languages.
That's awesome, man. Learn the foundation, the overall big picture.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Somebody who is starting their very first company.
Obsess over customers. Always be selling.
Oh man, that's awesome. Okay, somebody who is afraid and is thinking every day, AI is going to take my job.
I already told you, it's not taking your job. I'll take that bet. I'll bet on you.
Oh man, that's awesome. Okay, couple of things. Which is your favorite code editor these days if you're writing the code?
VS Code. I've used them all. Eclipse, but I think I've gone to VS Code, and that's where I am today.
Okay, currently you're sticking to the VS Code.
Yeah.
Of course, I guess dark mode. Who uses light mode?
Yeah, my backup would be Emacs. I still do a lot of coding in Emacs too, but if I need a full IDE, it's definitely VS Code.
Awesome, man. Okay, a couple of more things. If anybody wants to contribute into the flows or the open source side of it, where they can find these open source repository which you are actively working on or engaging in, where they can find them.
Yeah, so the irony is that Postman Flows today is not open source, something that we've thought about as a way of growing mass adoption. But you could download the Postman app and you can try Postman. You just have to find the little setting in your workspace and turn it on. We'd love your feedback. We have an open source repo for the Postman app where you can file issues and let us know what you think.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So a couple of things. I wanted to personally know, where you have moved on recently. I noticed that you shifted.
Yeah. What do you mean?
The location, which part of the world you are?
I'm in New York. I've been in New York for a while. I've just moved within Westchester County where I live. Used to live further north, so moved a little bit closer to the city.
Oh, nicer. All right. So any plan to visit India anytime near in the future? Because a lot of your team actually comes here.
Yeah. I have not had a reason to go yet, but it is a part of the world I have on my bucket list, as I haven't been to India or really much of East Asia, if you will. So have not had the opportunity, but we'll look forward to it in the future.
Oh, awesome, man. Again, this is all the questions that I have from my side as of now. But yes, again, as I told you earlier, I have read line by line from on your website. Oh, by the way, can I ask you one more question finally?
Of course.
On that? So yeah. your website says rabbah.io. And in case you are aware about the IO domain, which are probably going out or probably not going out. So what's your thought? Are you planning to move out? What's going to happen to your website?
Yeah, I saw the article just yesterday that the IO domain might disappear. I have lots of stashed domains that I could use. So I'll just have to dust off one of the other ones. I guess probably like everybody else, lots of side projects, ideas that we've thought, hey, it'd be cool to build this one day. So I'll put one to use.
Cool, man. Why is it going? Can't anybody take it over? We can't bend the rules and... it's a cool domain, but I have so many of them stacked up. I don't want to lose them, but I guess we have to.
I suspect they'll find a way because these domains generate a lot of money for the countries that essentially own the top level domain. So maybe they'll find a way. Yeah.
So
be interesting to see
something. Yeah, very interesting perspective. All right, so this is it from my side. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation here. And in case you have any question, drop a tweet or a LinkedIn to me, Rodric, anybody who you like, and share these videos around so that you can also learn a lot from the perspective of somebody who has been doing a lot of things. And again, we would love to bring more such guests onto the show here. So just keep on hanging around. And that's it for this one. And thank you so much, Rabbah.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciated this conversation.